Hey everyone, Hugo, back again in the depths of a busy life, which is not permitting too much musical activity. So I'm just jumping on to do another of these reading times. And thanks for clicking on it. I know some people are more into the musical stuff, but I want to try some of this podcasty type stuff. So I really appreciate you guys checking it out. Recently, I want to get too into the weeds on this. I'll try and summarize it as quickly as possible. Elon Musk, who's a nuanced character, let's say, he split up from his partner, who's a musician called Grimes, and she went out in the street almost immediately after, wearing this crazy dystopian outfit. Can I get that in focus? And with a copy of the Communist Manifesto. And she's kind of flicking through it. She's lately said that this is a troll on the press, and I believe it because it's pretty funny. But I just thought it would be an opportunity to actually read some of the Communist Manifesto and just share some thoughts about it. I know that when I was going through schooling, I wasn't ever sort of required to read this, and I really think that's a mistake because I left school already with some really faulty notions of what communism was all about, and insufficient ideas of what communism was, which really did me a disservice, I think, through my 20s. Anyway, the edition I'm going to be reading from is part of the Britannica Great Books of the Western World. Is that what they call it? Yes, Great Books of the Western World. Really worth picking up one of these. There's about 50 something books in it, and so if you spot one of these kind of brown spine books, collections of about 50 books, I found mine and I got them all for about $5 each book, which is a bit of an investment because there's 50 of them. But so worth it. An instant reference library to all the canon of the West, of which Marx is a part. Marx is a Westerner. Marx is European. We can go into his biography another time, but he's definitely part of the West, and so is communism. And so it's really important to understand what it is and where it comes from and what it wants to do. And so we're not going to talk. I'm not going to talk about Marxism, because I think that's slightly different. I'm also not going to talk about socialism. I'm just going to read an extract from this treatise that Marx wrote with Friedrich Engels on communism, specifically as a pamphlet was put out to try to lay out the manifesto of the communist ideology or party, let's say. It's very short, by the way, so everyone should read it. The first part is not that interesting, I don't think. It's kind of historical, lays out some history of the class struggle and things like that, how we got to the point in the mid-1800s where Marx was writing. Chapter 2, for my money, is the one. Chapter 2 is the really interesting one, where basically he tries to do battle with all the critics of his critique, of all the critics of communism, and basically tell them why they're wrong. And then, how can I say this? Marx is at his best when he's being a critic, when he's providing a critique. And so he's really kind of worth reading for that, I think. He's not always right. In fact, he's often really wrong. And his criticism is related to a very specific time of history. But it's solid stuff, and he's a really good writer for that time of history. But what's really interesting is, he can be the best critic in the world, but what does he actually propose to replace what he's criticizing? So he's criticizing capitalism. What does he propose to replace it? And in chapter 2, finally, in this pretty short book, but it's a tiny section we're going to read. Finally, he says what should replace it, and he describes what communism should look like. Okay, a really long preamble, but I think it's worth it. So let's read this section. The first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to establish democracy. Okay, democracy there, he's using it in a really, really literal sense, meaning rule by the people. But he's distinguishing the common folk from the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are like the property owners, the middle class, basically. And so by kind of flipping the rulership from the lower class, the lowest class, the working class, by making them the rulers, they're the people. So democracy means rule by the people, in his definition. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Okay, so it's a reversal. He wants to flip society on its head. There's a current ruling class, the bourgeoisie, and they should be replaced by a new power, which is the working class, become the ruling class. So let's see. So and that's his synonym for the state. So he says all instruments of production in the hands of the state. What does he mean by state? He means this ruling class of working class people. So it's an amazing notion, because he's talking about the lumpen proletariat, which is millions upon millions of people. They collectively will be the ruling class, which is by definition an elite, a select elite to be ruling. But somehow the millions of proletariat are going to coalesce into a ruling class who are going to rule over a comparatively small number of people who were the former property owners, the bourgeoisie. It's an amazing idea. Of course, in the beginning, this is really crucial, so I'm going to try and give it some gravitas. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production. Okay, so violence, basically. It's gonna require a bloody campaign of violence and military action to effect this change. You're going to have to become a despot, basically, what's the word? Like a totalitarian, authoritarian, violent actor, autocrat, in order to effect this massive change, to retrieve the property from the bourgeoisie and redistribute it. So despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, that's factories and stuff, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads on the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. Okay, so you start this process in train, and it will cause a process of revolution, which is kind of self-perpetuating. It will keep on attacking the old order, the old social order, and keep on breaking down the institutions that formerly existed, and that's how it will kind of fund itself, even though it's outstripping itself constantly. It's a massive undertaking. It will keep on funding itself by dismantling institutions and kind of sucking resources out of them, and that's how the revolution will occur. Okay, the next part, he starts a list. He starts a list of what a communist country will look like in its basic form. So what I'm going to do is read through the entire list, and then we'll go back through and look at them one by one and talk about the implications. These measures, that's the despotic inroads, I think, or the whole revolution, will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, that means advanced in the communist revolution, the following will be pretty generally applicable. Number 1, abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Number 3, abolition of all right of inheritance. Number 4, confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. Number 5, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Sorry, I stuffed up. I'll go back. Number 5 is this: centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Okay, number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with a common plan. Number 8, equal obligation of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. Number 10, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of child factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc. Okay, so those are the 10. Sorry about my stuff up in the middle. Let's just go through each of these one by one. So, abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Okay, so you get rid of private property. You have to use despotic inroads to do it. That means violence, killing people or forcibly removing them from their land, and by means of exercising state power. And it's then owned by the state, so if there's rent to be paid, it's going to public purposes. Okay, so what does this do? Fundamentally, it's upending an entire facet of a belief of the West that land can be privately owned. Now, it's perfectly possible to have objections with that notion that land can be privately owned. It's perfectly possible, and I don't, disagree ideologically with someone who wants to hold that position. But what's crucial about this that I think can unite everyone, by the way, I don't hold that position. I believe land can be privately owned. But what's crucial about this is that, like a lot of these tenets, he's not proposing that the land isn't owned. He's proposing that it's owned by the state. So what that does is it replaces the old class of landlords and landowners, and replaces it with state, like mandarins, let's say. That's what's encoded in when he talks about the public purposes or the state. He means that ruling class that he wanted to create from the workers. By definition, they won't be millions and millions of workers sitting at the top ruling. There'll be a tiny cabal of the smartest or the most ruthless. That's how it would roll out, and that's how it did roll out in all these communist countries. There's incredible levels of corruption in the top levels of the government, because why wouldn't there be? That's a natural part of human existence, that you have this kind of ruthlessness. And so if you create a system where you upended things, people who for whatever reason ended up owning land, they get tossed off it, and suddenly the government controls it, it doesn't mean everybody controls it equally. It just cannot work like that. there's a bottleneck of power, where suddenly the millionaires that you've replaced, or magnates or whatever, industrial heads, that role still exists, and it's occupied by some person who's more ruthless than the others in their revolutionary zeal, and that's effectively what happens. So by abolishing property in land and taking all rent to the state, all it does is siphons wealth to a new direction, and so it's not achieving what allegedly communism is trying to achieve. It doesn't put wealth in the hands of everybody. It bottlenecks it inevitably. Number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Not so bad on the face of it. I'm not a libertarian taxation is theft kind of guy. But what I do think is that really heavy progressive income tax, which obviously means you tax the rich more, just guarantees that the rich will avoid tax. So it's far better to have a flat tax, in my opinion, just sort of 20% flat. Everybody pays the same, and that way you actually reduce tax evasion. You get rid of a whole industry of kind of accounting and stuff like that. Maybe I'm being a utopian now, but anyway, that's my opinion. I don't have a too heavy objection to number 2, but a flat tax would be better. And in any case, okay, so here's the deal. It's just more money to this. I don't have an objection to a heavy progressive or graduated income tax within a democratic society. But what I do have objection to is when you've got people dedicated to expanding the institutions of the state ever bigger, whether it's in any type of society or even worse, this kind of communist society, where it's guaranteed that it's just filling the coffers of those people that I mentioned, the cabal of rulers who masquerade as men of the people, men and women of the people, but are really enriching themselves, and all the while wearing the face of a kind of proletarian revolutionary, when really they're just enriching themselves beyond the wildest dreams, which is what has happened. Cuba being a great example. The leaders there, Castro died with billions and billions of dollars. Where did it come from? It's pretty clear. Corruption. Okay, sorry, I'm really getting into the weeds on this one. It turns out I've got a lot to say about it. I hope you guys are staying tuned and enjoying it. Maybe absorb it in pieces. And number 3, abolition of the right of inheritance, of all right of inheritance. Okay, so what does this do? It seems like it would be fair, right? Everyone should start at the level playing field, and if you're able to receive money from your ancestor, then you're starting at an unfair advantage to someone else who didn't have that. Okay, I probably in the past might have had more sympathy with this one, but now that I'm a father, I have no sympathy with this whatsoever. I know that basically now everything that I do, it's like the Bryan Adams song, everything I do it for my children. It's simple as that. And that's a really, really powerful evolutionary sort of manifestation or development in the parents. They devote themselves to their children, and part of it is to know that whatever I accrue or whatever success that I manage to have in life I can pass on from this realm. I can pass on from this world in the knowledge that it will accrue to them, and it will lead to their it will lead to their sort of safety and security in the future. So the abolition of the right of inheritance I object to strongly, and it's all part of the attack on the family, which I'm not going to go into it now, but is a very, very clear goal of communism. Actually, I will read it real quick. It just says here, when he's objecting to everyone's objections, when he's fielding everyone's objections, it says, abolition of the family Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. And this is his justification. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in, I'm not sure if he means this literally, and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Okay, so he basically means when the communists win, they'll abolish the family because it'll just disappear as a natural course. I don't think he means that. I'm sure he knows that that would also require despotic inroads to abolish the family. And what can we say about that? I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah, so his reason for being against the family, or his reason for not even bothering to field the critique of why this would be a good thing, is that, you know, family's quite rare. It's only among the bourgeoisie, you know, that type of family exists. That's not a good reason. If family's bad, tell us why. I'm sure he does in other texts, and other sort of feminist type texts do as well, but he doesn't in this. He doesn't justify it. He doesn't explain why the family's bad. All he says is that the proletarian doesn't have it. So my counter to that is, you know, encourage the proletariat to have it. Encourage it. Create the necessary incentives to form families. If you do that, everyone can benefit from family. And as a family man myself, I can say that it's a huge benefit, humongous benefit to all involved in a family. Obviously a functioning family. I don't mean some abusive family. I just mean an average, normal family. Everyone benefits from that. Everyone benefits from there being families. Okay, where do we get to? Confiscation of the property. This is number 4. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants, not immigrants, emigrants, people who leave, and rebels. Okay, so confiscation of the property. So basically, keep everybody in line while you're doing the the land grab and the abolition of private property. You just, anyone who wants to leave the country, just take everything they've got. Take everything they've got. And anyone who wants to rebel, take everything they've got. So it's awesome way to fill the coffers again. Because you could accuse anybody of being a rebel, right? and you know, if you make life hellish enough, all the rich people are going to start to leave. Great, you just take everything they've got. Take them for everything they've got. It's very, you know, thorough. But yeah, the fact that you could just accuse anyone of being a rebel and just take everything, perfect strategy. And that is what happened. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Okay, so basically, national banks exist in nations and they run things. I don't necessarily think it's that good a system, but in general, they also have competitive banks who kind of exist in this symbiosis, and it provides competition. And his basic idea is abolish the competition part, just have the national bank. You know, this is another theme of this kind of stuff. It's all about central planning. Central planning never works well, especially if you replace the people who sort of naturally arose to those positions of power, okay, some of them through corruption, but a lot of them through competence, and you just remove them and replace them with some revolutionary. Those guys are not going to plan. A, central planning doesn't work, it's a disaster, and B, especially the type of people that you put in charge of it, they do a bad job of it. So that tends to be why communist countries go absolutely bankrupt if they adopt this policy. Oh yeah, okay, well I'm getting into the weeds, fuck it. You know, money, someone's wealth, is their ability to move in the world and exercise plans and things like that. So if you put that in state control, which he already said is despotic, you know, basically you're confining people's freedom. It's simple as that. It's another part of the totalitarian aspect of this stuff. Number 6, on a similar theme, centralization. There's centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Oof. I mean, crikey, you know, it's kind of what we've got at the moment with the internet, isn't it? I mean, you know, we can see what a disaster it is to have a monopoly on the ability to communicate and transport. If people can't move and people can't communicate without this state apparatus, you know, that's just a disaster, isn't it? Most people can see that that's a disaster. Even if you're pro the revolution, the initial revolution, what if those tools fall into the hands of the wrong people? And I think these are the wrong people, but whatever. If you give that much power to the state, you have to, if you want to give that much power to the state, you have to imagine that power falling into the wrong hands. It's, you know, I don't need to say any more, do I? Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, so more owned by the state. The bringing in to cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with a common plan, a centralized plan. So basically, instead of having farmers, independent farmers, or independent factory owners, it will all just be owned by the state and it will be centrally planned. Well, same deal. It's a disaster. It's always done badly, and they always think they can do it better than a bunch of farmers and a bunch of factory owners competing against each other, and they can't. It's as simple as that. They just can't. They can't do it better. They can't innovate. They can't adapt and move with. They can't move rapidly to changing conditions. And they also are convinced of wacky notions in general, that they can improve things by a sort of technocratic means. And because it's backed up by state power and the diktats that the state is right, they ignore feedback. Feedback is ignored. So when disasters happen, because they control the media and the communication, they just lie about it. And so it gets worse and worse and worse. In a terrible downward spiral. Okay, number 8, equal obligation of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies. Oh my God, especially for agriculture. Okay, equal obligation of all to work. I mean, what would that unleash? Obligation, backed up by state violence. It means labor camps. It means forced labor, basically. And the establishment of industrial armies. As soon as you use that word armies, it's like, what does that mean? You can draft people, basically, right? Especially for agriculture. So basically, like, instead of people, you know, and we've got problems with agriculture, don't get me wrong, but instead of people sort of trying to improve the system so that the working environment is better and more efficient, we just throw people at it in a forced manner, just throw them at it, and then lie about the results. So just catastrophic. Combination, number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. Okay, so kind of this is what ended up happening. We had like a green revolution in the end, and we did industrialize agriculture, for better or worse. But it did massively increase yields of agriculture, quite extraordinarily. Probably couldn't have happened under communism, because it was a result of innovation and competition that led to it. I'm not even saying it was a good thing. It's actually a pretty disastrous thing, but it happened. So actually he was on the money in that regard. But the gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. Okay, now that sort of did not happen. Cities increased in population dramatically, steadily. And that clearly was not a good thing, I don't think, overall, for many reasons, and we can go into it another time. But what he's proposing in this is a more equitable distribution. It's like forced relocation. Like, oh, this city's full. We're just going to take this group of people and move them. That's really what it has to mean, because there's no other way, unless they're talking about incentives and jobs and things like that, and selling your own labor, which is what happens under capitalism. You're talking about the equal obligation of people to work. You're talking about being able to push people anywhere you want in the country by some, excuse me, by some central plan and some technocratic spreadsheet. So, you know, a disaster. You just push people around, make sure they don't move. Actually, I think there's, I'm going to speak really out of turn here, but I think there's still parts of Russia where you're not allowed to leave. You have to sort of stay in Siberia because there's the population there, and I don't think you're allowed to leave. Fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I heard that somewhere. Okay, number 10, free education for all children in public schools. I'm going to take that one separately. All right, free education sounds fine, right? But it's you know, obviously education is basically a good, let's say. But again, the implication is that other forms of competition are removed. So homeschooling, not possible. Private schools, not possible. You might disagree with private schools, but at least they provide a form of competition. And all we have is these state schools, public schools, and it's free. Okay, that's not really how it works. Nothing is free, so everything has to be provided by the state, and therefore it's a suck on everyone else's resources. So instead of you as a parent, say, deciding how to educate your children and maybe getting together with other parents in a collective and forming your own school, maybe something along your religious or cultural lines within your town, the state top down will dictate what the school is like and where it's going to be and who's in it, and they will pay. They will take the money via taxation, and they will pay for it. What will they teach your kids? They will teach the approved ideology, and that, you know, that's a lot of what we're seeing in public schools across the West already. It's not good. These aren't good schools, and they tend to be quite risky, I think, and especially nowadays, to send your children to these, because you really don't know what they're teaching. Well, and that's in the West. Imagine what it would be like under a communist regime. What they would be teaching your children, and what they would be doing to your children. Forget what they would be teaching. And on that note, he says a sentence that I'm broadly, very, very approving of, or pro. Abolition of child factory labor in its present form. Yeah, no, children should not be working in factories. That was clearly a moral wrong at the time. So good on you, Marx, for pointing that one out. Definitely should be abolished. But then what's this? Combination of education with industrial production. Okay, so I imagine what he means there is saying that schools should prepare children to be industrially productive. I hope that's what he means. Unless he means that combination of education with industrial production, that you're actually producing, you're actually working in a factory in the school, I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. It could be either. And then he just goes, etc. Like, you know what he means. Bonkers. Okay, let's read to the end of this chapter. Thanks so much for listening on. This is easily the longest reading time. I thought it was going to be the shortest. But let's see. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Okay, so this is what people talk about. Like, Marx thought that you could have a revolution and it would be despotic and authoritarian and autocratic, and it would be violent, inevitably, and it would achieve all this, and then it would just sprinkle away. It would just disperse because the job's done. Oh, I don't need that power anymore. Can you imagine a dictator, a despot doing that? Oh, I don't need that anymore. I don't need all that money that's flowing into my coffers and all that wealth and land that I accrued just by being the topmost revolutionary. It's crazy. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. So that's what he wants for the proletariat, basically. He wants them to have the organized power for oppressing another class, the bourgeoisie. He wants to give them that power. If the proletariat, during its contest with the bourgeoisie, is compelled by the force of circumstance to organize itself as a class, okay, so, all right, if they have to do this and organize, which means kind of militantly get ready for revolution and enact despotic inroads, If by means of a revolution it makes itself the ruling class, and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. You see, so by carrying out the revolution, that's the final revolution, guys. That's it. There will be no more revolutions. There will not be even a need for any more revolutions. Do you see his vision? It's retired. I was about to say something else. It's mentally deficient to imagine that revolution works this way. A cursory glance at any revolution, except for a very, very few, shows that they are a death spiral downwards. They continually, they're a continual process of revolution upon revolution in a death spiral. So he's incredibly naive here. In the place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Very interesting use of the word free again. It's not liberty that he's interested in. It's just like, it's just utterly naive that any of this that he's just described has anything to do with freedom. It cannot. It's completely antithetical to freedom, because to achieve it, he already said it needs despotic inroads. And guess what? Despotic inroads lead to despotic superhighways, because they never stop. Okay, I'll almost leave it there, but I just thought I would read the last part of it, because chapter 3 is just like description of all different types of socialists, and I don't particularly find that interesting. It's from the 1850s, but I just thought I'd read the last few paragraphs of chapter 4, position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. So he's basically now talking in the 1850s. I hope I'm getting the year right, but anyway, mid 1800s. What do they think of the other countries? And I wanted to read this paragraph in particular. Listen to what he says about Germany. The communists turn their attention chiefly to Germany because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization and with a much more developed proletariat than what existed in England in the 17th and in France in the 18th century. And because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. Okay, so he's predicting in Germany that there's going to be basically like a French Revolution type event, and that it will then be followed by a communist revolution. Okay, is that what happened in Germany? You know, just think about what happened in Germany in the early 20th and mid 20th centuries. 20th century. Like, just think about the rise of the sort of communist activities in Germany, and what that gave rise to, the National Socialism, which was a sort of development of, offspring of, counter to those kind of communist tendencies, and then, you know, World War II and concentration camps and all this stuff, and just absolute catastrophe. So, you know, I just think that his prediction for the future, sitting from a vantage point of 1850, of what is about to happen in Germany, is just comical. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. Okay, so just anything that's upending, anything that's causing destruction in a country, we're for it. In all these movements, they bring to the front as the leading question in each case the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. So everyone's kind of whinging about the fact that there's a ruling class owning property. Yeah, true, and unequal, and probably need to do something about it. But, you know, to the communist degree, abolishing private property or putting it in the hands of a ruling revolutionary group is what really happens. Yeah, you be the judge. Finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties in all countries. Again, that use of the word democratic. Okay, last paragraph. This is good. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Imagine what the list of all existing social conditions. Just think of what that means. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. Yeah, I mean, let everybody tremble. It proved to be a catastrophic and bloody and despicable phenomenon of history, arguably the worst. So not just the ruling classes, let everybody tremble at a communist revolution. Disaster. Here's why I wanted to read it as well, just this iconic phrase. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. Okay, is that true? Is that true? Do they have nothing to lose but their chains? What about their lives? What about their prospects? Except for an unending and bloody internecine despotic revolution. Do they have anything to lose? Like peace, happiness, prospects, possibilities to innovate, possibilities to advance their own lineage and create a family that does advance, even if they're personally in a state of poverty. Is it possible that they could advance up a social ladder? Is it possible? Well, this communist revolution would say no, it's not possible. You're stuck there forever. Therefore, turn over the entire table. And is the game great? Is it great for all? No, of course not. There's real problems with it. But to upend it entirely, I don't think so. They have a world to win. They have a world to destroy because... and here we go. The final part. Final part of the Communist Manifesto. Working men of all countries unite. Bit sexist. Okay, so the Communist Manifesto. Yeah, when I read it personally, I just get irritated. I think it's so naive. I can kind of detect this kind of sophomoric attitudes in it, and I loathe it. I loathe the Communist Manifesto. So Grimes is kind of rocking it as a joke. It's a funny joke. She just broke up with a billionaire under goodness knows what conditions, and how wealthy she now is as the father of a billionaire's child. The mother of a billionaire's child, although she doesn't really see herself as a mother. Weird. I could go into that another time. So she's like trolling them, like, ha ha ha, look at me reading this thing. It's one of the most dangerous texts ever written. It rivals. People are really against religion at the moment. It rivals any kind of jihadist screed that's ever been written. Or whatever religion is your bugbear, it rivals that. In fact, in terms of the technocratic and industrialized forms of megadeath that it unleashed, and famines and just violence that it unleashed, I think it's up there. It's up there with anything. It's up there with the conquistadors or the jihadi raiding parties of the Middle East. You name it. It's up there. 100 million dead, I think, across Asia as a result of communism. And here's an irony that I think is particularly delicious. It's Western. It's a Western imperial ideology. It's a Western export. So a lot of people who claim to want to break free of the West and all of its ideologies and all of its poisonous imperialism and all that stuff, the thing that they embrace is also Western. It's also a white man evil from Karl Marx, the European. and it's you know, it's just more of the Western cultural and ideological export that people claim to be railing against. Wow, that turned into a bloody long one. 45 fucking minutes. Can I upload that? All right, I'm going to anyway. I've heard some people say that they like to, just chuck these things on in the background. I hope this one wasn't too disturbing. I hope you didn't mind the occasional swears that I dropped. Got to say, I'm passionate about this one. So, what did I get wrong? That's my reading on it. That's based on my own study. I never studied this formally. I wish I had. So, what did I get wrong? And you can school me in the comments. I'm always delighted to read any comments, positive, negative, anything. So go hard in the comments. Okay, cheerio.